A Dragon's Nest. Written by Avenethus. Read by Arashi. Childe had remembered Morax to be as large as a small house when he last saw the Archon at the rite of ascension. So why was that same dragon now small enough to be curled around Childe in a king-sized bed? Actually, here's a better question. Why is Morax, the now retired god of Liyue, sleeping alongside Tartaglia, the 11th Fatui Harbinger, who also happened to be the one to help steal the god's gnosis? The two had, somehow, become acquaintances ever since Ajax decided to settle in Liyue, until the Tsaritsa called upon him to enter the next nation. But surely such a long-living god wouldn't be blind enough to let himself be so vulnerable around a previous enemy. Sure, Morax had been planning to retire anyways, and was fully on board with everything, but the gods of Tevat responded to Celestia, which is the current enemy of the Fatui. Maybe it was due to a hangover. The strange bard accompanying them had been adamant about everyone finishing a crate of wine he borrowed from Diluc's winery back in Mondstadt. Before Childe could come up with a final conclusion, the sleepy dragon twitched awake. Yawning and stretching his paws out, the beast curled his snout closer to Ajax and let out a rumbling sigh of contentment. Could gods even get hungover? Scratch that, they definitely could. Ajax vividly remembers the numerous drinking adventures of Barbatos, recounted to him by Zhongli. The bard had a habit of sleeping at the Dawn Winery's bar when he couldn't manage to walk home, and stayed until brunch the following morning, until he was fit to function again. Even the kids in Mondstadt knew him as the drunk of the town, and each had their own interesting, and slightly exaggerated, stories of Venti's hungover misadventures. Whatever was causing this strange behavior from the dragon, it worked in Childe's favor nonetheless. He could have only dreamed of being in Zhongli's bed up until now, yet cuddling with the dragon wasn't quite what he imagined it to be like. Good morning to you too, Morax. Or do you go by Zhongli still? Can you even understand me in this form? As Ajax tried to get up, the dragon curled against him even more, but now slightly grumpy. The child would dare to want to leave the nest he had worked hard making for them. It wasn't very impressive to the naked eye, given it was just a pile of pillows, but Morax still put the utmost care into making it just right for both of them. Ajax had never seen this domestic side of Zhongli's dragon form before, but he'd heard many stories from Venti and Zhao over his past few months spent in Liyue. Many years ago, when the Geo-Archon lived among his people without a human disguise, Morax apparently had a habit of sunbathing on people's roofs in his free time. This was such a common occurrence to the townspeople at the time that no one batted an eye to the sleepy dragon getting some rest on people's houses, so much so that it was even seen as a sign of luck when the god chose your roof to be his evening lounging spot. It was honestly a miracle none of those people's houses caved in on themselves. Roofs aren't typically made to withstand the weight of a literal dragon. This made how many windows Zhongli had in his house make much more sense. Even now that he can't be seen by the citizens of Liyue, the ex-Archon never dropped his habit of sunning near a window while reading a book or taking a nap. As endearing as Ajax found this domestic side of Morax to be, they still had a hungover Barbatos under their supervision. Childe had left Venti on the couch with a bucket, just in case, but he knew from Zhongli's stories that the bard turned into an unrivaled menace when left unsupervised after a night of drinking. For all he knew, the bard could be out causing chaos in Liyue right now. But Zhongli showed no signs of budging when Childe tried to get up. His efforts were only met with a nasty stare. Ajax much preferred the idea of a wild Venti running around and causing trouble over a disgruntled dragon, so he ultimately decided to stay put, much to Zhongli's satisfaction. Ajax thought of reasoning with the dragon, but is that even possible? And does he really want to get up and babysit a crazy bard? Plus, he had so many questions for the man. Was the dragon's smaller size due to the loss of his gnosis? Does he often lounge around the house in this form? But Childe had a feeling he wouldn't be getting an answer to those questions anyway. At least, not until Zhongli decides to turn back into his human form. But who knows how long that will take, especially given how content the dragon looks right now. And that remains the biggest mystery of all. Why would Zhongli, or his dragon to be specific, be so happy to be cuddled up with Ajax of all people? Would he not be more content doing this sort of thing with another dragon? Were there any other dragons for Morax to mingle with in the first place? Childe was new to the world of dragons, but to his knowledge, Zhongli was the only one he's met. Surely there has to be more out there. But if so, why would Morax settle for him instead? No. He's jumping to conclusions. Maybe the dragon was too hungover to think clearly about what he's doing. But before Ajax could spiral down another rabbit hole of what the dragon's behavior implied, it slowly began waking up fully. Morax hopped off the bed and did a big stretch, almost identical to a cat's stretch, his backside up in the air, and paws stretched all the way forward, tail swishing around happily. He was seemingly about to fly out of the window and go to Archon's knows where. Childe took this as an opportunity to finally get up, but as soon as his feet touched the ground, the dragon made a very loud and startling growl, forcing Ajax back onto the bed. Huh? Morax gave him another glare and hopped out of the window, flying away into the distance. Ajax was left sitting on the bed, utterly perplexed. Where the hell did Morax think he was going? They were relatively far away from the busy parts of Liyue, but it's not like the dragon could go anywhere, at least not without being seen. As relieved as the people of Liyue would be to know their Archon is still alive, it'd be pretty shocking to see him just flying around, instead of 6 feet under the ground where he was supposedly buried months ago. Plus, that would kinda ruin the point of Zhongli's retirement scheme. Childe had been thrown through a loop with all of the strange stuff that's happened to him this morning, but instead of fretting about it, he decided to head downstairs and make a late breakfast, simply praying that Venti hadn't set fire to Zhongli's kitchen already. To Childe's surprise and relief, the bard was still passed out on the couch, a bit of drool dripping from his mouth. Instead of waking him up, Ajax assumed it'd be smarter to keep him unconscious for as long as possible, at least until Zhongli came back from wherever he flew off to. Childe isn't confident enough in his skills to keep Venti out of trouble on his own, at least not without force or some sort of violence, and he didn't think Zhongli would be too pleased to come home and find his guest tied to the couch. A rumbling tummy from Venti took Ajax out of his thoughts. Should he cook something? He hadn't gone near a kitchen since he was a kid. His parents back in Snezhnaya were always working, so more often than not, Childe was responsible for haphazardly throwing meals together for his younger siblings. Tonya and Trucer always devoured his meals, but Ajax isn't sure if that's because his cooking was good or that his siblings just didn't want to go hungry. Either way, he wasn't helpless in the kitchen, just a bit inexperienced. But it'll have to do for now, since Zhongli never specified where he flew off to, or when he would get bored of being a dragon and go back to his human form. So it was up to Childe to make a meal for everyone. It brought back memories with his family, but instead of cooking for his siblings, He was preparing brunch for a drunken bard and a, now slightly grumpy, dragon. As Ajax made his way to the pantry, he pondered what to make. While he assumed he was the most sober of the three, considering how much Venti drank last night, and Zhongli's cuddly behavior this morning, he wasn't feeling too hot himself either. He decided to make something simple, but the easiest thing that came to mind were pancakes. Zhongli might not recognize it, but Ajax remembers seeing them at a food vendor in Mondstadt, so at least it wouldn't be completely foreign to both of the guests. Not that they'd mind anyway. Venti would probably be grateful for anything, and Zhongli loved trying new foods. Not that pancakes are unique in any way. Also, it's assuming Morax will turn back human by the time the food is ready, or even come back home for that matter. He's also thrown in some of Zhongli's favorite tea. Childe swiftly chose to ignore the part of his brain, asking himself why he knew Zhongli's tea preferences. As Ajax got the ingredients out and set them on the wooden counter, a certain bard awoke from his slumber. From the corner of his eye, he could see Venti dramatically stretching his arms up and yawning. Fuck. He was too out of it to deal with this. Somehow, Venti had convinced Childe to let him help with breakfast. So, they were busy arguing over how to make the dish. While they successfully avoided a kitchen fire, in the end, all that remained was a burnt lump of wheat and milk. Both Venti and Childe sat across from each other at Zhongli's fancy dining table, staring at the disaster before them. It probably would have turned out somewhat edible if it weren't for all their bickering. But instead, they were left with this. By some miracle, after 5 minutes of staring in disbelief at the plate, the front door whooshed open, and on the other side stood a happy-looking dragon with a bag of groceries and food in its maw, and a disgruntled Zhao at his side. Childe didn't care enough to question how Morax got the food in his dragon form. He was too hungry to care. Just 2 minutes ago, he was pondering over whether he should risk his life and eat the burnt lump of death he and Venti cooked up, just to satiate his hunger. But now he had a joyful dragon prancing his way to the table and laying the bag down. Zhao didn't bother explaining, instead opting to sit down at the table with everyone else. Ajax never knew a dragon could look so adorable. Morax looked like a big puppy dog while presenting the food to everyone, happy eyes darting between Venti and Childe. Immediately after the food was set on the table, Venti pounced and opened the bag first. If he wasn't so eager, he might have heard Zhao muttering the word "fat ass" under his breath and swiftly covering it up with a fake cough. But Ajax was more focused on Zhongli, because who wouldn't be? He turned to Zhao with a confused look on his face. Zhao, are you sure there's enough food in that bag for Zhongli? He was still a dragon, after all. They have to have pretty big appetites. The Adepti turned his head away from Venti, hand still trying to pry the bag out of the bard's greedy hands. Lord Lapis gets food from offerings. Even if the public thinks he's dead, they still offer their blessings in mourning. When he doesn't eat offerings, he eats at gatherings or special occasions. Huh. As Ajax turned to look at Zhongli, the dragon was sprawled out on the couch, enjoying the sun that came from a nearby window. The tug-of-war between Venti and the Adepti ended swiftly, and the food was laid out. But as Zhao handed everyone their share, he noticed the pancake, what was supposed to be one, and visibly stiffened. What is that? Venti was in the middle of shoving a grilled tigerfish skewer down his throat before locking eyes with Childe. Fish still in his mouth, he pointed to Childe and continued eating. Well, that was rude. Sure, he was definitely most at fault for the disaster, but the constant bickering definitely didn't help. Zhao just sighed and opted to ignore the plate of death. After everyone was finished, Venti went to the couch across from the one Morax was laying on and started napping as well. Childe expected him to cause more trouble now that the bard was awake and had nothing to do. But then he glanced at Zhao, and it clicked. Zhao was a no-nonsense kind of guy, but even more than that, he wasn't afraid to get physical when Venti did something he didn't like, hence their vigorous round of tug-of-war earlier. It was so intense, Childe was worried they'd rip the bag in half and spill everything. Clearly, neither parties wanted to go back to Wanmin restaurant again, so they both gave up in the end. While Ajax and Zhao were cleaning the table, Childe decided to ask what's been on his mind. "Hey, Zhao? Can dragons be hungover?" Oh, God. That sounded so stupid. But it's the only explanation to Zhongli's behavior this morning. They had been growing very close over the past few months, enough so that Childe bought a courting gift that's sitting in his closet collecting dust, waiting to be given to Zhongli. But they'd never even hugged before, let alone slept in the same bed and cuddled each other to sleep. Zhao just nodded. Morax is a notorious lightweight. His dragon experiences the same side effects that human Zhongli would. With his suspicions confirmed, Ajax got up to go back upstairs and sleep some more. Morax shot up from the couch and trotted after him. While Zhongli's house had many guest rooms, none of them actually had a bed in them. Ajax came to this realization a little bit too late as he opened every door upstairs, only to be met with collection after collection of shiny objects that filled each room. From vases to musical instruments, there just wasn't any room for a bed. Hoarding amongst humans wasn't common. It was seen as unwise and greedy. Plus, it was expensive. But it made sense for a dragon like Morax. As Ajax exited the last guest room in defeat, not finding any beds, he saw Zhongli in the corner of his eye, waiting at the bedroom door, staring Childe down. Please, not again. Apparently, Morax's nap didn't last very long, because not even 30 minutes later, the dragon decided his nest needed a renovation. Ajax woke up to the dragon hovering over him with a pillow in his mouth, seemingly debating where to place it. Was it really this important? Because Ajax couldn't see it. The pillows weren't even out of place. They still formed a ring around the pair. It serves the same purpose no matter how neat it looked. Not that Childe knew what purpose a nest could serve for a dragon. On second thought, he'd rather not think about that right now. Despite Childe's protests to the unnecessary renovation, Morax continued swapping pillows and blankets around. By the time he was satisfied and laid back down, gently rubbing his head against Childe's face, the nest looked exactly the same as it had before. Maybe Ajax was just ignorant to the craft of nest-making. Maybe the previous one was so hideous, Morax had no choice but to change it. Thankfully, whatever made the old nest subpar had apparently been fixed now, as Morax had successfully settled back down. Childe couldn't wait for Zhongli to fully sober up, not only to ask him out on a date, but also to see the god's reaction when he wakes up in a nest his drunken self had made and forced Ajax to sleep in.